Hi everyone, this is Daryl and welcome back to Book Odyssey. Today I'm going to be reviewing Isaac Asimov's sci-fi classic, Foundation. So in this review I'll be looking at the first 3 books in the Foundation series. The Foundation series originally started with what is known as the Foundation Trilogy, which is what I'm reviewing today, but became the Foundation series after Asimov wrote numerous sequels and prequels to the trilogy, making this a series of 7 books, albeit quite short books by modern sci-fi standards. I'm going to try and keep this review as spoiler-free as possible, but I will be going into the basic premise for each of the books. Foundation introduces the concept of psychohistory, which has the potential for predicting and possibly influencing future social development and events. Everything begins with Hari Seldon, the creator of psychohistory, predicting that Trantor, the Galactic Empire's hub and capital, will be destroyed within 300 years as the climax to the Empire's fall. He predicts, through psychohistory, that this fall will lead to a 30,000-year period of anarchy before the Second Empire is established. He proposes a project to influence events so that this period of anarchy will be shortened to 1,000 years and not 30,000. The project, known as the Foundation, will undertake the production and dissemination of an Encyclopedia Galactica, which will contain all human knowledge on Terminus, a small planet on the periphery of the galaxy. Half a century passes and the Foundation, which, in its remote position on Terminus, has lost contact with Trantor and the Galactic Empire. It's faced with the first of what is called the Seldon Crises, events which force it into choices that will eventually lead to the Second Empire. Each crisis is a major turning point in the future of the Foundation. Should the leaders of the Foundation make the wrong decision, the Foundation may fall or be corrupted to the point of not being able to carry out the mission of creating a new galactic empire. The stories that follow take place over centuries and revolve around several Seldon crises as the Foundation gains power, territories, and enemies. The Foundation series is one of the first science fiction series that depicts an empire on a galactic scale, and you can see its influence in many science fiction books today, even though it was written by Asimov 70 years ago. The first book is really about establishing this story and laying the groundwork for what is to come, and to also raise the stakes in conveying a sense of what could happen if the Foundation was to fail in its task of securing Seldon's foretold Second Empire. After 50 years on Terminus and with Seldon now deceased, the inhabitants find themselves in the first Seldon crisis. With 4 powerful planets surrounding their own, the Encyclopedists have no defences but their own intelligence, which they must use to secure Seldon's prediction of a Second Empire. At the same time, a vault left by Seldon is due to automatically open. The vault reveals a pre-recorded hologram of Seldon with a message. The book follows the mayor of Terminus City, Salvor Hardin, as he pits his wits against the enemies looking to undermine the Seldon plan. The second book, Foundation and Empire, takes the story further, plunging the galaxy into the beginning of anarchy that Seldon predicted. It also sees the rise of an outsider called the Mule, who begins taking over planets at a rapid pace, and there are questions around whether Seldon's plan foresaw the rise of the Mule. It also comes to light that Hari Seldon didn't just create one Foundation, he created 2, but no one knows where the other resides. The second Foundation might be the only hope of defeating the Mule. The last in the 3-book trilogy is written in 2 parts, which were originally published at separate dates in Astounding Science Fiction magazine in 1949 and 1950. The first sees the Mule still searching for the location of the Second Foundation, and the mysterious Second Foundation comes briefly out of hiding to face the threat directly. The second part pits the 2 foundations against one another, with the first resenting the fact the second will eventually take over to form the Second Empire. The early stories were reportedly inspired by Edward Gibbon's The History of the Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire, and throughout the series we see a focus on the expansion of the Foundation against a backdrop of the stagnation and fall of the Galactic Empire. Another of the main themes is that of progression of human civilization, touching on the fact that history is told by the victors. Is there ever really a good and bad side, or are there only victors and losers? The Foundation looks at the progression of humanity on such a wide scope that it literally concerns itself with millennia, dealing with societal evolution and adaptation rather than focusing on a culture at one point in time. It also poses the question of whether the ends justify the means. The goal of Selden's plan is to unify the galaxy, which you could argue is a morally just goal, but to get there are instances where humanity has to pass through times of oppression and war, which, according to Selden's plan, are deemed necessary and therefore acceptable. And then I think there is, for me, the most interesting theme that runs through the trilogy as a whole, and that's the question around whether people as individuals are in control of their own fates, or is everyone just a victim of mob mentality, so to speak? Selden's plan is treated as unavoidable, a mechanism of society assessing the decisions of quadrillions of humans across the galaxy en masse. Many characters struggle against the plan only to fail. Like many science fiction books from this era and other classic sci-fi, the Foundation Trilogy doesn't overly concern itself with things like characterization and attempting to create fully realised characters that people can relate to. Instead, it really puts its focus on the concepts, using the characters as vehicles for the story rather than using them to drive it. I think it's one of the major ways science fiction has changed through the decades. There are noteworthy characters, however, which did intrigue me as people, but they're never really explored. Harry Selden himself is this almost godlike presence throughout the books, and yet the actual time we spend as a reader with this character is really just a few pages at the beginning of the book. The Mule is another interesting character, and Asimov does spend a bit more time to delve into the motives of this character, but never really gets under his skin, like many modern readers might come to want or expect. I think because the story concerns itself with such a wide scope of history, as a writer it must have been quite hard to get around that. How do you get readers to invest in characters that, in the next book, or possibly even the next few chapters, will have passed out of history? I think one of the ways Asimov tried to get around this was by creating links between the characters. So, for example, the character Arcadia Durrell, one of the main characters in the second Foundation, is the granddaughter of Beta Durrell, one of the main characters from Foundation and Empire. The writing in Foundation Trilogy hangs everything on the narrative. The narrative voice, so to speak, is so prevalent it often feels like that the narrative is the protagonist, which it might be. This, I think, is also a symptom of an earlier style of writing which has passed out of favour among most writers today. I often think that the fact there is little characterisation and the heavy narrative style is because, with the exception of books like Dune, most sci-fi books were much shorter in this so-called golden age of sci-fi. Whether this is something that publishers required, I don't know, or maybe it has something to do with the fact that a lot of science fiction stories, including many of the Foundation installments, were published as serials in pulpy sci-fi magazines. Whatever the reason, Foundation has a certain classic style to it, which you'll probably be used to if you read a lot of classic sci-fi, but you might find a little bit difficult to get into if you haven't. I've read a few reviews of Foundation from people that really didn't like how Asimov employs exposition in dialogue in order to either move the story forward or to reveal plot. I think this is because most writers today employ a show don't tell approach, which means compared to books like Foundation, it can feel like characters are simply revealing what's going on through conversation, which might come across as lazy instead of having the characters discover and progress through action. I have read quite a bit of classic sci-fi, so I almost have a different brain setting when reading it. All of the things I expect from modern sci-fi and modern sci-fi writers are almost completely thrown out. If a modern sci-fi writer put as much exposition in their conversation as Asimov does, I don't think I would let them get away with it. But with the Foundation Trilogy, there is so much going on, you could almost argue that it's necessary to have these expository recaps. Reading the Foundation Trilogy is not an edge-of-your-seat thrill ride, at least it wasn't for me. There's something in the way it's written that creates a bit of distance between story and reader, at least perhaps modern readers. Because of this, it felt very much like reading a story rather than experiencing a story, and felt almost, to some degree, like a historical text, much like the history of the decline and fall of the Roman Empire, which was perhaps Asimov's intention. What I can say about the trilogy is that it is grand in concepts, even today, 70 years later, and it's a very pleasant read. Pleasant might not sound like a rave review, but it's honestly a story I enjoyed. It was sort of like doing a jigsaw puzzle, where for the majority of the books you're given pieces bit by bit until the very end you get the last piece and you see the thing as a whole, and how it made sense all along. I will say the trilogy lacked a sense of closure, and it's because of this that reportedly Asimov went on to write the further prequels and the sequels. So I gave each of the 3 books in the Foundation Trilogy 3 stars out of 5, and the trilogy as a whole 3 stars out of 5. So that's it for this review. I hope you enjoyed it. Please give the video a like if you did, and also subscribe if you want to see more content from me. We talk about all things books, mostly sci-fi and fantasy, so if that's your thing, feel free to stick around. Until next time guys, happy reading.